Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my presentation. This one's number two, and my focus is going to be on distance learning. My name is again Roberto Modano, and let's go ahead and dive in. Now, when it comes to this week's reading in Sherman, we talked about division in chapter six, and in basic words, what is division? Is basically the partitioning and measurement of things. Uh, Simplest terms, splitting items by sections evenly. Now, what is the best way to capture a kid's attention when talking about division is talk them into their most valuable asset, which is candy at the moment. So again, if you have candy, you want to distribute it among three friends. All three friends want the same thing, the same amount. So that's one of the starting introductions of division in math class for the kids. However, as such, we do run into error patterns, which in this case, the first one that Sherman discusses is the long division algorithm, which essentially is you're doing the work correctly, but the issue is where you're putting the quotient, the answer. And the first error pattern is reversing the answer on the top. So the two, the zero, and the one are actually in the wrong position, and this is why they are not getting the correct answer. Wherever they get a 8 divided by 8 is 1, which shouldn't be at the corner. It should have been on top of the 8. So it's just a matter of structure or positioning that needs to be readdressed. The next one was the value of 0, which again, in this case, they forget to put a 0 when they move to the 1, because 8 does not fit into the 1 at all, which might get a 0 in the middle. So instead of saying 8 times 102, it's just 8 times 12, which is not the number of 8s that you can fit into the 816. And finally, recording quotients in this aspect is basically you're doing the student is doing all the process correctly. However, they are forgetting to finish it off at the end. As you can tell, this problem does have a remainder. It is important that the remainder is written to show that it's not a perfect quotient. So as a result, this one's missing, and we have to redirect the students to ensure that the quotient is there at all times, and as with its remainder. And once again, Sherman provides some basic, however, effective strategies that he mentioned before. Again, always start with a few problems at the beginning. Not only make them few, but also make them simple, just to focus on the understanding and procedural aspect before we diving into the more complex. And during my teaching credential, I think we used to call it the gradual release of responsibility, whereas the teacher would do a guided instruction on these problems and eventually leave it to the students to work together and finish off these problems to ensure its mastery. So again, start with simple, pair students by groups based on their academic achievement, and have them also help each other, assist each other as in a collaborative effort for eventually going to more complex problems in this topic. Now, moving on to the topic of this, the main focus of this lesson is the types of distance learning. Again, distance learning is now it is ingrained in all of our brains due to the pandemic, but distance learning it was still something relatively new prior to COVID, and because of COVID, we learned that there's two types actually. There's synchronous learning and there's asynchronous learning, which I was lucky enough to experience both before the pandemic and afterwards. So synchronous learning was basically is you're still attending class at a certain time. You still have to log in. It's just done online. It's done through computers and applications like Zoom, Google Meets, etc. So you still have to be attendance at a certain time and day, but you don't have to be in person. And I used that. I learned that with my master's program. I did that. I was using Zoom during 2019. So again, it allowed me to test out these services earlier on than the traditional school district, which actually gave me an edge to be more resourceful to my district, to my school. They eventually gave me an additional position, and because of that, I was able to help other teachers with their Zoom situation, which was pretty handy, if you ask me. So the other one we're doing is asynchronous learning, and we're doing this one with UND. Again, you don't have to meet in person, but there are assignments you have to meet and submit over time. If you want to meet to discuss them, they can still do that. But usually, distance learning means working on your own at your own pace, getting deadlines, and make sure those deadlines are met. So these are the two basic ones. And with asynchronous learning, you don't really need a video device. It's basically as long as you can have access to your Canvas, Blackboard, Google Classroom, etc. Now we connect this to the first article, connecting a mobile influence that it can have on distance learning. So with our first article, it discusses how using mobile devices can, in fact, serve as an intervention itself and increase the academic achievement. And this focus is solely on the third grade level. So focusing on this level, this is a Kiger article, and they examine how these control groups, are different from each other. For example, the first two classes rely solely on traditional learning techniques, such as using flashcards to learn how to multiply, while those other two classes use a device like the iPod Touch, along with several applications downloaded to the device, used to learn multiplication aspects. And what did we learn was that the mobile learning had a higher achievement um, than the traditional learning methods. And this was recorded with a post assessment, and it was used to measure how far off they were from traditional learning methods. And however, the only thing is this research was only done relatively in a relatively low amount of time. It's not a long term definition of how it can go. So that is something that is worth doing further research on, but it shows a lot of promise. The next article focuses on the actual pandemic aspect of distance learning. You know, distance learning has been around for a while prior to this prior to the pandemic. However, it became worldwide it became a worldwide phenomenon because of the pandemic, because everybody had to learn or relearn how to teach and learn in an online matter. And this study goes over the pandemic repercussions of going online when we were not prepared. And it focuses in the country of Finland, another elementary level, grade three. And they talk about how distance learning affected the students' academic achievement. So jumping right into this, we saw that the focus was on reading and math. It was tested to measure its loss, expecting loss over time. However, uh, also the parental background was initiated just to see where the students came from, the parents' education, school involvement, child behavior, how the child was allowed to behave at home, and the results were kind of astonishing. Yeah, as expected, the reading did suffer a low amounts of fluency development and comprehension. However, math was not affected as much as, or obviously as much as expected. The learning trajectory for math was still on its way, and there was not a lot of issues when it came to math. That was a rather pleasant surprise, even for me, because we expected student academic achievement to be lowered across the board because of we're not learning the same way we used to. So that was a rather interesting and honestly comforting topic that maybe math was saved from the pandemic. And finally, jumping into our last article is another aspect of distance learning, but in this case, something that we take for granted in the U.S. This one is learning through turmoil. In other case, distance learning happened not because of a virus, but because of the social instability of Chile. And so again, that disrupted the traditional classroom environment, and students had to enroll to school with online because of it. Again, what did we learn about this in the Araya article? It was that the research started as a cluster randomized method. It was a group of fourth grade students, uh, and the results again. It was also a positive. The learning when it comes to math was actually more effective online than in person. It actually learned 2 months. They were actually 2 months ahead of of time. So it shows that maybe distance learning and math do have a positive relationship, a positive correlation. However, the only thing that you know that this kind of affects our story here is that this was only a short term study. It was 1 semester long, and there was already a lot of absenteeism going on, and prior to the study, so it's we cannot just connect this to distance learning as a result. Perhaps it was a combination of both, but um, it needs that. It also needs. It's worth noticing that there was a technological infrastructure already in place in Chile prior to this distance learning happening. So unlike in the United States, which is sad by the way, we had to accommodate technological limitations in our districts before we were able to teach successfully amid a pandemic and go remote learning. So that was one of the differences between the United States and Chile. That actually Chile showed way more preparation than us when it came to this global phenomenon. And finally, guys, going into distance learning from in my own personal experiences, everybody had a different experience when it comes to distance learning, and in our situation is that we saw that a lot of the veteran teachers, a lot of the teachers had that taught for double digits, struggled the most because of their lack of technology adoption. And lucky for me, I was fresh into my teaching career. I was in probably my fourth, fifth year teaching. So I was still, more willing than others to accept new ways to show my teaching. And because of that, I think I benefited from this pandemic situation. For example, one of the first thing is you wanted to you wanted to show some sense of normal to a student. You wanted to show that the best transition possible, even though it was impossible for a student to show a transition from in person learning to distance learning. So sometimes you have to adapt as a teacher, and what I learned to do is using transitional slides along with music that allows them to get ready for class. For example, with this timer and you see this music playing in the background, it allows them to know when class is about to start. It is also a constant reminder to mute their mics, and it's just a great way to get students ready for class, even if it was only for 30 minutes. Another aspect that helped my learning, my teaching throughout the pandemic is the creation of an online calendar. As we're moving to online learning, I felt the need for more online resources, more accessibility to the material. So the creation of an online calendar using Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel provided students with that lack of surprise or being as transparent as possible with my classroom. It is something that I even use to this day. Just using a calendar and having students understand what's coming next. Every time a student would ask what's gonna happen on Tuesday, what's gonna happen on Wednesday, Thursday, etc., I would just guide them or redirect them to this calendar I have on our classroom. And if you click on the word lesson, this link will pop up for students to look at our notes, which was another thing I learned through the pandemic is transferring my notes from a physical to a digital aspect. A digital aspect that could be easily edited, and also improved upon, and something that the kids could have access at home. Why was this important for me? Because it allowed students to not only have access to these notes, but also review them at their own pace. Not only was this a great way for supporting students, it was for students with IEPs or whatever. It was also important for students like those who were absent because of chronic absenteeism, or because they were sick, or because of sports. So having these online notes for them made it way more accessible for them to have it in their notebook. And eventually, at the end of the pandemic, that also led to the creation of my own YouTube videos. And again, why I have videos? Because I mean, it is extra support. It provides support for students with IEPs, students that are absent, and it eventually led to my dissertation, which is it paved the way to my flipped classroom aspect of math teaching. And so these videos that I created, these were my creation, and so I even made my own intros. Blue because we. But they basically discuss the lessons that we covered in those digital those digital topics, those digital notes. Again, having these videos guides helps guide the students, helps them again have a sense of normalcy, and it's just for the support for them. And I managed to make a video for one or two videos for every single set of notes. Um, the pandemic really opened my flexibility and adaptability of teaching, and students are still benefiting from it to this day. So I'm very I don't want to say I'm very grateful, but I'm grateful with myself that I opened myself to the opportunity of becoming a better teacher because of it. So this is learning only helped me widen my repertoire of tools at my disposal. And so, with that in mind, it was really helpful. And that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully, you guys learned something from it. And this is learning, I think it's here to stay. It's just becoming better and better as years go by. And hopefully, you guys have a good night and talk to you soon.